I'm very happy to host here again Professor Max Stern. It's the third time we have you in our, oh, sorry. I forgot to press recording. Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to host here for the third time Professor Max Stern. Professor Stern is a professor for music from the University of Ariel, and he's also a very unique composer. Professor Stern studies musical traditions from East and West, from different countries and cultures, and from different Jewish communities around the world. And he composed contemporary art, contemporary music based on those traditions. He did studies from Yemen in the south, from Iraq in the east, and from Europe and all over the globe. But tonight, because we are still giving the lectures on Yemen because of our exhibition about Yemen, so tonight we're going to talk about the traditions of the Yemenite music, which is very unique because they don't have any, almost don't have any instruments. They mainly sing. And he's also going to share with us composition. So he composed from inspired by Yemenite music. I hope I did it correctly. Professor Max Stern, welcome.
Thank you, Robert. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for attending. Unique is the culture of Israel. Unique to the culture of Israel is the contribution of the Jews of Yemen, whose musical traditions draw upon scriptural cantillation, prayer modes, devotional hymns, and women's songs and dances. All this has found expression in dance, inspiring composers to integrate these rich ethnic sources into artistic compositions. This is a map of, you see the Middle East, and you see here Jerusalem, and Jewish emissaries, merchants, and traders in spices and gold came to Yemen following the visit of the Queen of Sheba to King Solomon's court around 900 BC. Now, 400 years later, a sizable group of emigres, among them priests and Levites, fled from Jerusalem to Yemen. 40 years before the destruction of the first temple, in response to the prophecies of Jeremiah, prophesying the doom of Jerusalem. Jewish communities grew and prospered in Yemen for a millennia. They afterwards, however, following the rise of Islam in the 7th century, the social and financial status of the Jewish community declined. As non-Muslims in a Muslim world, they were subject to oppression and persecution. By the 17th century, 1,000 years later, longing and yearning for redemption, Messianic mysticism infused new life into the dispirited Yemenite Jewish community, motivating rabbis and poets to give voice to their hopes and visions in poetry and song. Modern Aliyah to Israel dates from 1882, which was considered by the Yemenites a Hebrew year of redemption, after a Kabbalistic interpretation of a phrase from the Song of Songs. Now, let us explore the roots of Yemenite music, whose origins are found in the Yemenite Cheder and Talmud Torah. Here we see the Yemenite Talmud Torah. The exacting pronunciation of Hebrew by Yemenite Jews is considered a survival from the First Temple period. It is an essential component of Yemenite identity, characterized by a distinctive quality of inflection with guttural chet and ayin. This ancient heritage is embedded into the psyche of the Yemenite Jew from earliest childhood. The sonority of Yemenite Jewish music thus begins in the Talmud Torah by way of learning to read Hebrew through singing. Here, children from the ages of 3 and upward chant the letters and words, vowels, and verses of the Torah. Instruction in the Cheder is both visual and oral, continuing daily, day by day, week by week, and year by year, until Bar Mitzvah. In this way, Yemenite children absorb both knowledge and tradition, as well as social and cultural values. Now, what is the pedagogical methodology? It is simple, it is repetitive. Each individual pupil recites a verse or pasuk from the Torah. This pasuk is then repeated by the entire class and then repeated a third time by another boy who intones the same text in Aramaic translation or Targum. This threefold pattern of verse, Targum, like the thrice repeated Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh of the Kedushah, goes on and on and on until it becomes second nature to the boys. I recorded the following excerpt as a participant in a Yemenite Talmud Torah here in Jerusalem over 40 years ago. The text describes the priestly inspection for leprosy. Now we come to this, what I've written here. Ra'u hakohen v'hinei pasah hanetek ba'or lo yivaker hakohen l'se'ar hatzahol tamei hu. Then the priest shall look on him, and behold, if the scroll be spread in the skin, the priest shall not seek for the yellow hair, he is unclean. Now you'll hear the teacher, the Mori, teaching the student who doesn't know the Talmud too well, and we'll hear then the repetition by the class.
ورآه הכהן
וראה הכהן
והנה
והנה
פוסע הנתק
פסח הנתק
בוער
בו
לא יבגר הכהן
לא יבקר הכהן
לשיעור הסוף
לשרעו הסוף
רומהו
הומהו
So that's the Yemenite Cheder, which goes on and on and on. Now the tone and timbre of these youthful voices in the Cheder later matures and gives expression to sacred songs celebrating the Sabbath and festivals. Now we have the classic anthology of Yemenite poetry is the Diwan. And this is the Diwan. This is what it looks like. It's a big, quite big. A rich treasury of devotional hymns for synagogue, home, and community. The piyut Agil ve'esmach, sung on the festival of Passover, is characteristic. Agil ve'esmach le'el ashabach, ve'esbach zevach, ve'yom hapasach. I exalt and rejoice and praise God, and offer sacrifice on Pesach Day. Was the Agil ve'esmach piyut. And now we shall encounter this same piyut transformed and performed in a concert setting. My composition, Shepherd Song, for flute and strings, adapts Agil ve'esmach for the concert hall. In so doing, an imaginative element has been added to the original. What is it? It is a change of perspective, envisaging the traditional Passover piyut as a shepherd's song, the shepherd's pipe as a flute. Adonai ro'i lo ichsar. The Lord is my shepherd. heard the Israel Sinfonietta, Daphne Itzhaki on the flute, and Yoram Kerensky conducted, and Shepherd's song.
Max, can you speak louder, please?
Yes, so we've heard now two versions. One in the Cheder, Temani, then the adults singing, and then now a concert performance. And following now, I'd like to present an overview on Yemen and the music of Yemen in this film, an ethnological film on Teman and the music of the Yemenite Jews. Here we go.
A century ago, the remnants of an ancient Jewish tribe, living echoes of a bygone age, began their return to the land of Israel. The sense of togetherness and an abundance of musical talent are the unique traits of the Yemenite Jews. The Israeli composers, who until then had drawn their musical inspiration from their birthplaces, mainly Russia and Germany, were seeking new sounds to reflect those of ancient Israel. In the 1920s, at the encouragement of Chaim Nachman Bialik, verses from the Bible were set to a Yemenite melody which soon became the most popular Tu B'Shvat song. The Yemenite sense of togetherness in everyday life and in music was well suited to the atmosphere of camaraderie that typified the early days of settlement. Yemenites like Suleiman the Great and his musical family, and the traditional celebrations they organized, the Haflot, are as popular today as they were then. The Yemenites were very different from the other Jews who had arrived from the diaspora. The attitude at the time was to create a new and proud Jew, an alternative to the persecuted European Jew. The Yemenites were perceived as a perfect blend, combining the ancient world with a new one. Their influence is evident in all the arts: drawing, painting, jewelry making, dance, and of course, music. The trend of the Israeli composers since the 1930s had been to combine Near Eastern musical elements with European techniques. Composers such as Paul Ben Chaim, Mordechai Setter, and others were captivated by Yemenite melodies. This influence is also felt in Noam Sharif's music for woodwinds, trombone, piano, and bass. All these composers saw themselves as creators of a new style of art music, the Mediterranean style. Songs were always accompanied by dance. Styles varied with the different regions of Yemen. The Khabani from the east, and those from the center near Sa'ana. Drumming was used by all. Mourning the destruction of the Second Temple resulted in the prohibition of using musical instruments. The Yemenites, stringent in their observance, accepted this ban literally. Instead of developing the playing of musical instruments, they perfected singing and rhythm. Another unifying factor is the Diwan, a 300-year-old collection of liturgical hymns dating to Rabbi Shalom Shabazi, the greatest of Yemenite liturgical poets. The Diwan, the basis of all songs for men, is always divided into 3 parts. The first part, called the Nasheed, is an introduction, always sung by a soloist. In Yemen, the Jews could be distinguished from the Arabs by their simonim, side locks. They are still part of their traditional costume. The Nasheed concludes with a paraphrased verse from the Book of Psalms, chanted in a set melody, which serves as a bridge to the second part, called Shirah.
شوم باهم حكم وضعف عذابي عين الالفة عن وثقرة شنا وقومي ثرارا التمام اللاحظ وعبرات
When the atmosphere becomes charged, the singer switches the melody or changes the rhythm. The more switches there are, the more successful the event and the more esteemed the singer. Most liturgical hymns are sung in Hebrew or Arabic and some in Aramaic. The dancers also express the content of the hymn. The singer is in constant contact with the dancers. The dance fulfills a cultural custom and is not merely performed for its own sake. The music never slows down, but rather accelerates constantly. At the end of the Shirah, the singer recites the last line. This signals the beginning of the third part of the Diwan, the Hallel. The Hallel begins and ends with the word Hallelujah. It is always sung to a fixed melody, a living testimony of the most ancient sounds of Jewish music that, despite the millennia of exile in Yemen, remain unchanged. The Hallel consists of prose, including numerous biblical quotations. Its source is the Hallel prayer, recited in the synagogue on holidays and also on Hoshana Rabbah, the last day of the Tabernacle Festival. There is evidence that this is the way it was sung during the days of the temple. One Talmudic source claims that this is also how the Israelites sang the Song of the Sea when they left Egypt. The scene has changed, but not the sounds. Folk tradition links the origin of the Jews in Yemen to the period of the First Temple's destruction. Ancient Jewish customs, which had nearly vanished, have been passed on due to the Yemenites, who preserved them with utmost accuracy. Yemenites were always known for their precision. The rhythm begins with the Hebrew language. They are precise in their pronunciation of Hebrew, singing it in measured rhythm and always together. Hebrew is a rhythmic language. Every syllable must be emphasized. The Yemenites preserve the original Hebrew pronunciation. The reading of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, is the foundation of it all. Most Jewish communities have only one qualified Torah reader. In Yemenite synagogues, each person called to the Torah reads for himself. As in Talmudic times, the reader is assisted by hand signals indicating the cantillation. During the Second Temple, the Jews in Israel did not understand Hebrew, and an Aramaic translation was necessary. A child reads the Aramaic translation of each verse. This is an ancient custom derived from the Mishnah, twice in the Bible and once in translation. Every syllable is a musical unit. The Yemenite chants date back even earlier than the cantillations developed in Tiberias in the 6th century. In a society in which togetherness means so much, important functions are assigned to everyone, even to children. Children are familiarized with the traditions of their forefathers starting at a young age. The Mishnah states that Bible study begins at age 3.
Nadim! Go!
Even today, Yemenite Jews, including those who are not particularly observant, send their children for religious studies after school.
بیاد حداقا وعطويا ومرا جادل وغادل ثم فادي ويا من
Rudiments of Torah reading and Yemenite tradition are taught by the Mori, the most significant educational figure. The melodies are fixed and designed to serve the text. The main purpose is to review the weekly Torah portion. For generations, the Yemenites have educated their children in this manner. This tradition continues unchanged. When the children turn into young adults and it is their turn to leave home, the majority still prefer to spend their time in an atmosphere of familiar sounds, at nightclubs for Yemenite music. Yemenite Jews have not closed themselves off from modern civilization. Their culture allows them to accept innovations while preserving their own lifestyle. This is a living, breathing, and persuasive culture.
So we see a general overall view of the background of Yemenite music. I'd just like to comment on 2 things we saw. One was the singing together on Sukkot. This comes from the Talmud Torah again, where they sing together all the time. It's a social, it's cultural behavior. And the second was what the Mishnah said, that he sings twice the Torah and once the Targum. And where does the Mishnah get it? And my feeling was that Mishnah gets it from the Navi, Yeshayahu, who says three-part Kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy. This is what gives it the sanctification. Now let us explore how a single piyut, the love song Ahavat Hadassah by Rabbi Shalom Shabazi, evolves from its ethnic origin into an artistic cultural influence in modern Israel as an art song, a tone poem, a folk dance, and even a scene from opera. Here is the Yemenite bride. Now, why do I bring the Yemenite bride here? For centuries, the Yemenite Jew lived in complete subjugation to Muslim rule. He could not own land, travel outside the country, engage in finance, wear a sword, or ride a donkey. He was obliged to pay a protection tax imposed upon non-Muslims called dhimmi. His only solace in spiritual release came from the study of the Torah and the observance of mitzvot. I repeat, his only solace in spiritual release came from the study of Torah and the observance of mitzvot, arousing in the Yemenite Jew a deep felt yearning for redemption and fulfillment in the land of Israel. The sense of longing found its expression in the allegorical interpretation of the Song of Songs and the wedding, a bonding of bride and bridegroom, symbolizing the marriage of the Jewish people to their God and to the land of Israel. And thus we have the bride. Ahavat Hadassah, by the legendary 17th century sage, saint, and poet Rabbi Shalom Shabazi, gives voice to these ardent messianic longings for redemption, and as such articulates as well an important aspect of modern Israel, modern Israeli identity, the love of Zion, inspiring folk song, communal dance, and concert music. Let's see. Ahavat Hadassah. Ahavat Hadassah al levavi nikshira va'ani betoch gola ha'amai solelim. The love of Hadassah in my heart is bound like a knot I cannot untie, but I am in exile with my feet in a swamp. The love of Eretz Yisrael in my heart is bound like a knot I cannot untie, but I am in exile with my feet in a swamp.
אהבת הדסה ללבוא בי נקשרו, אהבת הדסה לבוא בי נקשרו, ואני בתוך ג'ולו קומי סוללים, ואני בתוך ג'ולו קומי סוללים.
About his sacred songs, Shabazi himself writes, quote, "Let no man think that they are, God forbid, words of lust of a profane nature, but rather written after the similitude of a proverb or riddle, like the Song of Songs of Solomon." Let's hear that again.
אהבת הדסה ללבוא בי נקשרו, אהבת הדסה
We now move on to two legendary figures in the history of Israeli music, Paul Ben Chaim and Bracha Tzfira. The composer Paul Ben Chaim, who fled from Germany to Palestine in the 1930s to become one of Israel's musical founding fathers, sought and found in Eretz Yisrael an artistic alternative to his European outlook and background. In his musical arrangements for Yemenite folk singer Bracha Tzfira, who originated the Oriental biblical Israeli folk song idiom of the 1930s, we see the inspiration that Ben Chaim drew from these sources, as we hear his adaptation of Ahavat Hadassah for voice and orchestra. What is this?
אהבת הדסה לבבי נקשרה, אהבת הדסה לבבי נקשרה, בני בתוך גולה בעמי צוללים, בני בתוך גולה בעמי צוללים, שחרית וערבית.
It was an arrangement of the same fugue by Paul Ben Chaim. Ben Chaim later fashioned from Ahavat Hadassah an orchestral tone poem, transforming the imagery of bride and groom into a love song for Eretz Yisrael. Now, let's see how this very song.
Professor Stern, can you speak up, please? Can you speak a bit louder, please?
All right. Now we see how this song, along with traditional Yemenite dance, becomes integrated into the mainstream of Israeli folk dance. Israeli folk dances were first created by chalutzim from the first, second, and third waves of immigration to Eretz Yisrael. These pioneers sought authentic Jewish culture in the land of Israel. In their search, they adopted aspects of Yemenite dance. If solo dances, as we saw in the film, were an expression of intimate religious ecstasy, communal dances, swaying back and forth in a line, were an affirmation of group cohesion. Ironically, this ethnic expression was in congenial sympathy with kibbutz ideology as well. And now we see Ahavat Hadassah danced.
אהבת הדסה.
אהבת הדסה. אהבת הדסה הלבבי נקשרה. השיר של שלום שבזי. מנגינה תימנית, עממית. וכמובן שאהבת הדסה הכוונה לא רק לאהבת רעיה, לאהבת נערה, אלא הדסה היא סמל של ישראל, ציון. הגעגועים לציון, זה אחד משירי הגעגועים לציון.
Now, see that now we were in the kibbutz, and now in a final example, we witness the transformation of the piyut yet again, extracting from its melodic gestures thematic and motivic elements in creating a vivid theatrical experience. I incorporated Ahavat Hadassah as a basis for my opera, Messer Marco Polo. And now this is the marrying song episode from my opera, Messer Marco Polo, a scene leading up to the wedding of Marco Polo and the daughter of Kubla Khan. Here, however, I treat the tune in a very different way from anything we have heard so far. Rather than place it into a folklore idiom, I extract motifs from the original and then develop and expand upon them dramatically. So many different versions and expressions of Ahavat Hadassah. Now, considering all these different versions and expressions, whether as a sacred hymn, a folk dance, an art song, a tone poem, or an opera scene, still, nevertheless, a certain essence remains throughout. What is it? What is this essence that remains? From Yemen to the land of Israel, as far back as the emigration from the first temple in Jerusalem, to prosperity in a strange land, from persecution under Islam to Kabbalah and mystical visions of salvation in Ahavat Hadassah, and finally Aliyah to the land of Israel. Through it all, the inspiration of King Solomon, the Queen of Sheba, the Song of Songs, the wedding, the love of God for his people, and the longing of the people for Eretz Yisrael continues to endure. And it continues to inspire. And I thank you. Here we see King Solomon, the Queen of Sheba, the men of Solomon and the men of Queen of Sheba with the camel coming from Sheba, Yemen. Are there any questions? Now's the time.
Okay, I think you maybe do the stop share so that everybody can see you.
Stop share.
Okay, so if somebody has a question, no?
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I'm surprised you have not mentioned anything about the Inbal Dance Company.
Right, very true. You're right. There's a lot of things I haven't mentioned. The whole direction of this lecture was to try and show how this music has been placed into a concert setting from the original ethnic music. And there's a lot of other aspects too. I mean, I could have mentioned a lot of other names here. You're talking about someone like Sarah Levi Tanai, who created the Inbal Dance Company. But there are a number of other artists, for example, Ofra Haza, Boaz Sharabi, Achilon Mini, Zohar Argol. All of these people have also done Yemenite songs. But I think they're more popular. Some of the things they do are more popular than some of the things I've shown you, because the work, for example, of Paul Ben Chaim, while it was popular in the 30s and 40s and maybe 50s, today is hardly ever performed. No? That's what I say. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
The dance that you presented as the folk dance is not the original one, which conformed more to the original music that you gave. And the original folk dance was really introduced by Sarah Levi Tanai. And I think it was the first dance with any Yemenite steps that was accepted into Israeli folk dance.
A lot of, I mentioned that the first, second, and third Aliyah created the folk dancing, but it continued into the 40s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. So,
but the presentation of the folk dance that you gave was not the original Ahavat Hadassah that went into Israeli folk dance. That was a much later innovation, and the music is very different. It's not the original music.
Yeah, well, that was my purpose wasn't to show what was the original. The purpose was just to show that it had been done on the kibbutz.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Try to get the connection between the kibbutz and the Yemenite music, because that's really such a different world, you know. The kibbutz from Western Europeans who come to Israel, who want to find other values, and then you see the Yemenites who come with their tradition and the traditional Jewish values and song, as you saw in the film on so that was the purpose of that.
Thank you.
ערב טוב, הערה לגבי הקריאה של הילדים בתימנית, מה ששמענו זה קצת היה יחסית בלגן, כמו שאומרים, אבל במזרח ראשון, אולי צילה מכירה, יש מורי בשם אלי גמליאלי, שהוא מדייק מאוד בקריאה של התורה, בקריאת התורה, שהוא מלמד ילדים תימנית, וחוץ מזה עוד הערה, לגבי קריאת התורה, ישנם סוגי קריאות שונות בתורה של תימנים. לא כל התימנים קוראים באותה צורה. יש קריאה של צנענים, יש קריאה של שמים, יש קריאה של שרעבים, יש כל מיני סוגי קריאות. וזה משתנה בין הסוגים השונים של התימנים לפי המקומות שבהם הם גרו בתימן. עוד דבר, אני חייב לציין שגם היום קריאת הטעמים של התימנים היא לא הכי, נקרא לזה, היא משמרת כן, אבל היא עדיין לא משמרת לחלוטין את הקריאת התורה כפי שהייתה בתקופה הקדומה. לדוגמה, קריאת הפזר, נכון להיום, היא שונה לחלוטין איך שקוראים אותה היום, ביחס לקריאות בתקופות הקדומות, וכן טעמים נוספים שיש בהם שינוי.
That's a little bit more depth than we wanted to bring here. As far as the Yemenite, that cheder, that's a real cheder. I studied it for 2 years with that cheder. The student that couldn't sing the Ta'amim was me. He was teaching me how to sing the different accents of the Torah. And that's exactly the way the children did it. That was rehearsed. That was an unrehearsed recording that we did here. Just exactly. That's what happens. I mean, don't forget, the children are what you saw in the film, you saw children who were disciplined because they had to make a film. But what you saw, all the confusion, is what happens in the Yemenite. It's what happens. Some know it, some don't, some are older, some are younger, and everybody does what they can do, you know.
When you will be again in Rishon LeZion, I advise you to visit the Talmud Torah of Eli Gamlieli. You will see this very good discipline of the boys at learning and everything like this, you know.
When, where, and how. I remember that the teacher, sometimes he got a much better discipline when he slapped all the children, but sometimes this is the way it happens. This is what happens. Okay. I mean, I don't know every Mori.
Yeah. No. Maybe Tzila knows him. צילה, את מכירה את אלי סינואני? לא? הוא ממזרח ראשון והוא מעולה, פשוט מעולה. ויש לו תלמידים, קרוב לאיזה 30 תלמידים, שהוא מלמד אותם בקריאה מדויקת. אם תרצו, אנחנו נוכל לעשות איזשהו מפגש ותשמעו אותו, יש לו גם, הוא הוציא ספרי דקדוק בקריאה תימנית, והוא פשוט בחור מעולה בעניין הזה. דקדקן גדול.
Okay, Yael Tzadek has a question. יעל צדוק, חשמה שיש לה שאלה?
כן, בבקשה. עברית או אנגלית? Max, do you understand Hebrew or only English?
I understand Hebrew, but talk Hebrew, I'll translate it.
Well, I can ask him in English too.
אנחנו כולנו יודעים קצת עברית.
יודעים קצת עברית, אז עברית יותר נוח. זה שתי שאלות שקשורות, אולי נגעת בזה כי אני נאלצתי לצאת לאיזה רבע שעה. אני מוצאת שאין שום קשר בין הפיוטים התימנים, שאני נהגתי לשיר עם אבא שלי המנוח בלילות שבת, ושמעתי את התפילות בבית הכנסת, אין שום קשר בין זה לבין מוסיקה ערבית. ואמר לי פעם גיל אלדמה, שעבדתי בכל ישראל, הוא אמר לי שהמוסיקה של יהודי תימן מאוד קרובה למוסיקה הגרגוריאנית. אתה יודע על זה משהו? כן, לא, כאילו יש, דומה למוסיקה.
I'll say this. The musical, it would be הפוך. The musical Gregoriani is similar to the musical Temani. Now, why do I say this? You know, in the Middle Ages, I didn't bring this example. I didn't expect that I would have such a musicological review of my lecture. But in the Middle Ages, the boys and the priests used to chant the chant in parallel fourths or fifths. They would chant the fourths and fifths, the Gregorian chant. And if you hear a Yemenite singing in the synagogue with boys and men, it also is in parallel fourths and fifths. That's what they do. So probably the Gregorian got it when the Jews when they after the destruction of the temple, and they were traveling around, and probably they were singing, and those who were turned into Christians, they knew of that tradition, and they brought it into the church.
אתה מניח שהמוסיקה היהודית תימנית מוצאה, השורשים שלה בבית המקדש?
אנחנו לא יכולים, זה מה שאנחנו לא יודעים, אנחנו לא יודעים את זה, אבל אנחנו יכול להגיד שזה יכול להיות שזה דומה למשל, אנחנו לא יודעים את זה. אנחנו יודעים, כמו שאמרתי, שיש המסורת של קבוצה של תימנים יצא מירושלים לפני חורבן הבית הראשון, ובתוך 1,000 שנה היהודים השתתף בבעל התימן, גם מהבית השני, בדיוק מה היה, מה לא היה, אף אחד יודע, ולא יודע, 100%. I want to say, this is all up for supposition.
כן, תודה.
Okay.
Were any of the recordings from Yemen itself?
From Yemen itself? In Yemen itself?
Taken in Yemen? Any of them?
This is very interesting. Very interesting question, because there, as far as we know, maybe today there's something, but as far as ethnological of Jewish, no. All the ethnological recordings done of Yemenite Jews was done here in Israel after they came to Israel by researchers who wanted to find out what it was. For example, one of my teachers, Joanna Spector, was here in the 1950s, and she made a number of recordings of Yemenite Jews. They wanted to preserve these ancient traditions, but when they were in Yemen, nobody, the recording first of all, they left before there was recording, and all the musicology that was done really was done from the beginning of the century by Idelson, Abraham Zvi Idelson. He started this whole idea of ethnomusicology with Jewish Edot. So this was already 1910, and so forth, where they use the old kind of recordings. And from there, then until the 40s, then when the 50s came in, and the Yemenites came to Israel, they started really doing much more in-depth research. But Yemen, I don't think the Jews had already left Yemen, and anything before that, there was no technology to record them.
Thank you.
Okay, so any more questions or? Okay, so thank you very much for the lecture. Hopefully we're gonna see more of you here in the museum. Hopefully next time you'll be in the museum and not on Zoom. Next week we're gonna host Dr. Leonardo Cohen-Shvut, who's gonna speak about the epic struggle between Aksum and Chimyar. Aksum is one of the first Christian nations in the world. It was in Ethiopia of today, and Chimyar was in Yemen of today. It was somewhat of a Jewish kingdom. It's not exactly accurate to say Jewish, and they had a very epic struggle between them, not surprisingly. And we're going to hear about it next week on Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Hopefully, even if we're going to be a quarantine or something like that, we're going to continue with the Zoom program as scheduled. So, if not, we're going to have an update in the website. But for now, we're going to do the Zoom anyway, no matter what's going to happen. Okay, good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.